Well, welcome to Friday afternoon at the Manor. My name is Dr. JJ, and we're delighted to have a wonderful program lineup. So we'll say over to Susan to greet our speaker today.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. We're happy to welcome Dr. Carrie B, who is going to be talking about Bees for Peace, an organization which is attempting to solve many problems at once and to learn from the bees. So I'm very interested to hear about that. Doctor?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Let me just get this going, please. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is going to be my talk for today, partnering for peace and pollinators. And if that term pollinators confuses you, don't worry, I will be explaining it. But I want to start with a land acknowledgement, which I will just read out loud, and I want to say a few words about it then. Bees for Peace acknowledges that it is operating primarily on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples in territory covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Now, the reason why I wanted to read that out loud is because I hear a lot of people complain that the land acknowledgement has already become pro forma, something you do just because it's expected to be done. So I want to talk for a minute about why we do the land acknowledgement, and it is to recognize and to honor the people who have always stewarded this land so that it thrived. What Bees for Peace is all about is not only respecting the traditional, the indigenous peoples who have stewarded the land, but encouraging people to act accordingly, to also steward the land so that it thrives for all of us, for all of the beings that live here. So a lot of these days in the churches, you hear a lot about caring for creation. And the earth is home to uncountable species. What you see here on the slide are you see three different kinds of bees. These may not be how you normally imagine bees. If you think of bees as honey producing bees, there's actually 20,000 known species of bees in the world, 4,000 of which are in Canada. And not all produce honey, and most don't live in hives, but they do something very important for us and for the world, which has to do with that yellow dust you see them all covered with, and I'll get to that. But this is part of the incredible diversity that is the planet that we live on and that is our home. And according to the Bible, to the Christian scriptures, God declared them good. So bees are central linchpins in the health of the earth. They are often very central to specific ecosystems by making sure that those particular communities of life function well. And if the bees disappear, the quality of life in those particular communities will decline. Since 2019, the United Church has been celebrating creation during the season of Pentecost. And the United Church asks us, what is creation saying to us? The United Church talks about the future, about us dancing into the future. And I want to ask, what kind of future are we creating? Is it a future that we feel like we can dance into? So what I want to do is talk about creating a future by taking action now, a future that we can celebrate and dance into. Okay. My understanding of the speaker series is that it's to help a lot of the community members of Mena Road who are feeling isolated in especially because of COVID-19 and all the protective measures that we've had to take in order to protect each other. But these protective measures have unfortunately had a negative side effect, which has been to increase anxiety and to increase depression. And at this point, I think after 2 years, I think all of us have been affected by this. At first, it was the people who are more marginalized economically or socially. But at this point, after 2 years, I think we've all been really affected by this. I'm going to come back to this because I think what I'm going to talk about today is a way to help mitigate the effects of that isolation and fear that COVID has generated. Of course, while this pandemic has been raging on, we've had other crises to deal with, and we still need to deal with them. Increasing climate change, increasing loss of plants and animals, and other species that we're dependent on for the health of this planet. Of course, now we have rising inflation costs. The cost of everything is going up. And all of this can generate more war and more social conflict. Now, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I'm actually going to be talking about very good news. Okay, but this is just kind of setting the stage because the project that I'm going to talk about can help deal with a lot of these issues. Just a couple more. You see on this slide 3 different pictures that represent food security. I wrote food insecurity because 1 in 8 households in Canada suffer from food insecurity. But you see pictures here like the blueberries, which we like to eat. In the center, I don't know if you recognize this particular flower. If you do gardening, you might. This is a squash flower. And then on the right, you have flowers that don't feed us directly. But these 3 pictures are all related. And it has to do with that little bug in the center picture, which is a bee. Specifically, it's a squash bee. And it pollinates the squash plant. In other words, it is very central in bringing us the food that we enjoy eating, the squash and the blueberries. But its cousins, other bees, need flowers such as what you see in the right. So our food security is dependent on these creatures also having food security. Now, this brings me to the topic of pollination. I said I was going to unpack that word pollinator and talk about the fuzzy dust that you saw those bees covered with. Pollination is basically this process of getting the pollen from one flower to another flower. Why is this important? Because pollen is actually flower sperm. This is how flowers reproduce. Flowers, unlike humans, can't just get together, right? They don't walk. So they need an intermediary, a bee, a butterfly, a beetle, a bat, maybe even the wind, right? But they need some kind of intermediary to get that sperm to the female reproductive organs of another plant. And that's where the bee comes in. This is what the bee does. It doesn't mean to do this. It's actually going after the world's original energy drink, which is nectar. Very high on sugar with some caffeine and nicotine and amino acids in it. It's just trying to eat. But its body is created in such a way with all these hairs on it that it happens to pick up this pollen and transport it to other flowers. When bees evolved 100 million years ago, there was an explosion of flowers. And this is the world that we share with them today, a world full of flowers and fruits and vegetables. But last crisis I'm mentioning, bee populations are also declining. And this has a lot to do with, well, us, right? As we create cities and suburbs, homes for ourselves, we take away space for them. As we put in a lot of cultivated flowers from other places, we take away the food sources, the native plants, that they are biologically adapted to. We break up their habitats, right? By putting in lawns everywhere, right? Parks. These are food deserts for bees. In agricultural areas, we have fields so big that bees can't even fly across them. So if they can't feed from whatever's in that field, where's their food source? And then, of course, things like pesticides, well, they kill all insects. Climate change, that's disrupting the time that flowers bloom and the time that bees fly. So there's a disconnect there. And then, of course, diseases and pests. Now, the good news is that there's a lot that we can do very simply to fight all of this. And what I'm going to propose to you is something that can help rejuvenate your mental well-being, help rebuild your community, increase food security and sidestep inflation, help restore ecosystems and protect the climate, promote peace, and even deepen your connection to your own faith. That's a tall order, isn't it? But it's pretty simple. And this is really what Bees for Peace is all about, okay? So what we try to do at Bees for Peace is we try to encourage religious communities like your own and people in your community to plant native plants, plants that are native to this particular ecoregion. Do that at your house of worship, but do it also at your own home, do it in the park, do it in a community center, do it at your children's school, right? Then we imagine bees as messengers of peace, because if the church plants native flowering plants and the mosque plants them as well, and the synagogue plants them as well, the Buddhist temple, the Hindu temple, the non-religious school, bees don't care. Bees don't discriminate. They are happy to feed from the flowers at all of these different communities. And therefore, they unite us in this web of peace, okay? All of our religions and our humanistic traditions teach us that we are to promote peace. We are not to discriminate. We are to protect nature. We are to act in moderation. What do? Right? We forget or we ignore what our religions teach us, right? We discriminate against each other. We have our wars, we have our conflicts, right? So the bees, by protecting them and preserving them, can also act as our role models to remind us of what our religions teach us. Now, I have found that this idea tends to resonate with people. Bees for Peace got its start in Cologne, and this is one of the people I worked with there, Anna Fonda Elz, who was a Buddha center director. And she said, bees don't discriminate. It doesn't matter what religion you are or what country you're from. Everybody needs bees, right? And so a lot of people can understand this basic message of bees connecting us in this web of peace. So what can we do? What can you do at your church? What can we do at our institutions? What can we even do at home? It's pretty simple. Take out some of that lawn, the grass, the food desert from a perspective of a bee. Take out some of it and put in a diversity of regional native flowering plants. Make sure you have enough diversity of flowering plants, of those native flowering plants, to bloom all the way from May until October, right? That's the flight season of the bees. So that's their feeding season, right? Where I live in Etobicoke, I see lots of beautiful tulips. They're so great. They bloom until June. What are the bees going to do after that? What are they going to eat? So we want a diversity of plants that bloom all the way until October. Any invasive plants, get rid of them, and then create some nesting areas, because the bees, of course, need more than just food. They need to have nests. They need to lay their eggs. And this can be very simple, just some bare soil for those bees that live in the ground, or some dead wood for those that live in old logs and things like that. Of course, get rid of the pesticides. They're going to kill the bees. And then encourage your neighbors to join you in creating these native plant gardens. And then you start creating these paths of peace, which then helps to relieve some of the social conflict. So how do you actually do this? Well, here's your house of worship, right? And you want to first find a site. How big is the site? How small is it? What can you actually do? And how sunny is it? Is there a lot of sun, a lot of shade? Because this will determine what kind of plants you put there. Maybe you have a wall that can act as a windbreak or that you can put plants against. Maybe you have room for a tree or a couple of bushes, right? Then you want to think about the 3x3x3 principle, which is that we have 3 different seasons: spring, summer, fall. And you want to pick plants that bloom for each of those 3 seasons. You want 3 different varieties for each season. And then of those 3 varieties, you want at least 3 individual plants. And this is because, think about it, you're a bee, you're flying around. This is a lot of hard work. You see the plants that you like to feed from, you see 1 over there and 3 over there. Where are you going to go? You're going to go for the 3. Actually, this is scientifically shown that bees do have a preference in that way. Okay, so you help them out. So here's your spring, here's your summer, and here's your fall plants. The city of Toronto would like you to plant goldenrod, which does not produce allergies, but does provide a lot of food for a whole host of bees, butterflies, and other animals. And then once you do all of this, the rest of the community will show up, right? Not just the human community, but the rest of the life community as well. Now, if you're dealing with food insecurity, you can prepare ground right now and put in a vegetable garden for the summer. Because unlike most vegetables, native plants can be planted in both the early summer and in the fall. So you could have vegetables growing now, and when they're done, rip them out. You got the land already prepared and put in native plants. There's so many benefits to this. It's a simple thing to do, and there really are a lot of benefits. In terms of preserving nature, you restore the habitat that bees need, you increase their food supply, you give them nesting sites. All of this helps to attract birds and other creatures, giving them also habitat. Native plants help draw carbon down from the atmosphere, which helps to fight climate change. If you partner with other people, you connect habitat. I mean, can you imagine if, bees have flowers here and the next bunch of flowers isn't for some distance, right? But if the next bunch of flowers is next door, you're really helping the bees. And then, of course, you're helping to preserve the native beauty of Canada. And a lot of native flowers are really quite gorgeous. Now, in terms of your community, this isn't just good for nature, it's good for humans, right? Because you create this multicolored oasis that's full of life, right? You got the bees buzzing around, you got the butterflies visiting, you got the birds singing, right? And this extends the sacred space of your church outside of its 4 walls, right? And creates more sacrality for your community. For people who are still worried about the transmission of COVID, rightfully so, you can put in benches that are physically distanced, but still close enough that people can speak and have community again. This helps brighten up the neighborhood and creates this image of your church, right? Because what you do on the grounds of your church sends a message to the community. And this sends the community that you're serious about caring for creation. But it helps to restore mental well-being because gardening, even just imagining nature, can actually help with depression. But gardening itself, getting out there, connecting to the soil, connecting with life, really has been shown to help restore psychological well-being. For those community members who don't have their own space, and can't afford the membership fees in a community garden, you give them some space to do some gardening. And all of this can really help to empower your community. Now, a lot of people in Toronto are people like me. We're newcomers. We're from somewhere else. So our sense of nature is also from somewhere else. With this kind of garden, with a native plant garden, you give us newcomers very concretely roots in Canadian soil. This is a way of actualizing the land acknowledgement. And finally, for the children in your community, you give them the opportunity to garden and to learn about bees and butterflies, to learn about ecology and how nature works. Again, you can reconnect to the ecological principles in your traditions. And maybe this is not, maybe Reverend John Joseph already talks about this. But when I think about some of the ecological principles in Christianity, I think of the primordial human being, right? Adam. The name Adam is cognate to a Hebrew term that means arable land. Adam is himself a fruit of the earth. He was created from the earth, and then he was put on the earth to take care of it. That was his command, right? The earth was a garden, and it was his job to take care of that garden. So our primordial occupation as human beings is to care for creation. It's there, right there in the Bible. In terms of the creation in 6 days, when God finished creating everything, God said, it's good. It's really good. I don't read Hebrew, but I've been told that the enthusiasm is actually in the original Hebrew. It's really good. And God blessed it. God blessed everything that God made. So this is a gift. And how should we treat a gift? Well, with respect and with care. So these are just some of the ways in which, by actually getting out there and connecting to the earth, connecting with this beautiful gift that God gave us, you can really start to reconnect with some basic tenets in the Christian faith. And then finally, it does really work to help spread peace. As I mentioned, Bees for Peace got started in Cologne. We had an award ceremony there in 2020, and this is the community that turned out to celebrate that in the middle of a pandemic, pre-vaccination. So of course we held it outside, and I gave out Bees for Peace protective masks. But you see, we had people from Judaism and Buddhism and Baha'i religion, from Catholicism and Protestantism and Islam, people who were interfaith, people who were vaguely of faith, and people who were even of no faith. Right? This idea of bees as messengers of peace really appealed to a wide spectrum of people, and they all supported the project and supported each other. So you may be thinking, how can we pay for this? Well, depending on how much you do, this could cost anywhere from, I don't know, maybe 200 up to 2,000 or 3,000. In terms of projects, it's fairly affordable. And there's lots of different ways that you can come up with creative funding. Just send around a plate, right? This is typical of what happens in churches. Create lovely cards of the kinds of plants, the native plants that you want to plant, and people can collect those as they put some money in the plate. If the United Church has funds for this kind of thing, you could put in an application. You can ask people to sponsor a plant or two. And in fact, you can ask grandparents to do this for their grandchildren as a way of creating that future that the grandkids would be happy to dance into. Of course, you can do this for any kind of holiday, for Mother's Day, for Father's Day. Get people to buy gift certificates for the garden that help finance the plants. Make it fun and hold an auction, right? Or get together with other communities and swap plants with them. There are gardening websites on Facebook. Maybe people are swapping native plants there. That's always a possibility. And then Project Swallowtail, which is a sister organization to Bees for Peace at Pollinator Partnership Canada, does offer plant kits for sale. Okay, and if you sign up for them with them as a free member, you can order plants through their plant sale. You will have to come up with a maintenance plan. And the most important thing is that you plan for succession so that whoever is doing the garden this year, you know who's going to be doing it next year, right? Have a water supply. And then the maintenance, I think, is not too difficult once you get going, right? If you have to pull out some grass, that's going to be one of the most tedious things. But you put down some wet cardboard and cover it with dirt and just leave it for a while. Especially if you start in the fall, this is very effective. It will break down and then you just turn it under. It'll kill the grass and you turn it under and then you're good to go. Throughout the blooming season, you just have to remove weeds and make sure that the baby plants are watered. And after a while, the native plants will put down roots up to 4 feet in length and they'll pretty much be able to take care of themselves. Okay, so coming to a close, just to recap, the time and money commitment is fairly low, but the benefits are really high. It's good for your mental well-being. It helps rebuild your community. It can tackle food insecurity and climate change and species loss. It can help you reconnect to some tenets in your Christian faith, and you can use it to build bridges with others. I just want to mention that this summer I'm working with students. We have about 7 students. And so if Manor Road would like for a student from my project to accompany you as you start redoing your pollinator garden, we would be happy to help with that. Okay, and that's it. Thank you so much. Please be in touch, and I would be happy to have you as part of Bees for Peace.
Oh, that was wonderful, Carrie. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So I always have a few questions from my corner. So when
Sure.
if you think of, let's pretend we don't have a hole to fill and we don't have to, the pollinator garden's ready to go. Would Manor Road be able to have, we'll call it, what's the correct term? Apiary? No, a beehive on site? Or is that not permitted in residential neighborhoods?
You know what? I actually don't know the answer to that question because I'm not focused on honeybees.
Right.
I'm focused on Canadian native bees.
Right. Okay. Okay. So that's focusing on pollinators then. Okay. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So where would you think, when you think of, we have, as you mentioned, we have perennial flowers in Toronto, and we're really trying to cap, and not the sort of the annuals, and then there's the wonderful river valleys. Are you finding there's a lot of high bee population in the river valleys where there's a lot of natural growth that's not requiring domestication?
Yeah, I think there's more native bees there. How well the populations are doing can be sometimes a little difficult to know because it's the bee ecologists who actually go out and count bee populations, and their time is often limited. So this is one of the reasons why what I'd like to do at religious communities is actually do these citizen science projects with kids.
Right.
So that, like through the app iNaturalist or other ways, we can actually track the bees that show up in the gardens, so that we can actually help the bee biologists have a sense of how well the bee populations are doing.
So how do the bee biologists?
I'm sorry, Reverend John Joseph, if I can just return for a quick minute to the issue of honeybees.
Sure.
Okay, because I know that there's a lot of confusion here. Honeybees are great, and all of the world's religions have traditions surrounding honeybees because humans like honey, right? And in the Christian faith, beeswax candles used to be used on the altars of medieval churches because the ancients believed that bees were chaste. So bees were used to represent the Virgin Mary, and the wax was seen as the product of the immaculate body of Mary, and therefore we're good representation for Christ. Okay. The thing is, in Canada, honeybees are not native. They've been imported from Europe.
Mm.
And honeybees, although they are suffering from colony collapse disorder, they themselves are not endangered. They can outcompete native bees for food, and they can transmit diseases to them. So I am not really focused so much on the honeybees, but I'm trying to raise more awareness about native bees, which are largely solitary, much smaller than honeybees, except for the bumblebees, of course. And they kind of fall under our radar. They don't produce honey. They don't live in hives. We don't really notice them. But if we lose them, we will notice their loss, because 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we take is due to pollinators. And a lot of those are these native bee pollinators, which pollinate very efficiently. So we've got to raise more awareness around them. So I love honeybees. I love honeybees, but I am not focused on them.
That's very good, because I mean, there is a misnomer that honeybee, well, I mean, obviously people know that there are bees that aren't honeybees, but I mean, I think we mix them up thinking the ones we want are the honeybees. No, I mean, no. And so, but to your point, they're not the natural bees. And I think that's very key to not confuse that, definitely. And so how would, though, a biologist go about tracking bees? I mean, I mean, doing a census isn't quite possible, but obviously.
Right. So there is, kids these days, they love their technology, right? I mean, try finding a kid that's not walking around with a smartphone. And these smartphones are full of apps. One of the apps that they can download, there's 2. There's one called Seek, where if you hold your phone up to, like, here's a little buzzer, right? And you hold the phone and click on Seek, it'll tell you what that species is, what kind of animal that is, or what kind of flower it is. iNaturalist, we want to use iNaturalist also as a way, where people can take pictures of the bees and upload pictures of them. And that will help supply data for the bee biologists.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, definitely. So it's called Seek or iNaturalist. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I is in the letter I, and then the word naturalist. And we have a project already on there, Bees for Peace, so people could upload pictures there.
Okay. Well, that's a great idea. I think that's wonderful. So when you do your, we'll call it walkabouts, what neighborhoods have you been doing this in, where you discover where the natural bees are?
Yeah. Well, right now, I mean, Bees for Peace is pretty new in Toronto. So right now we are working in Sherbourne area and in Etobicoke. And we will be putting in our first pollinator gardens this summer.
You say Sherbourne, you mean Sherbourne Avenue or Sherbourne Street?
Sure. Is it Avenue or Street? Do you know Our Lady of Lourdes Parish?
Yeah. Oh, Sherbourne. Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, I live in Cabbagetown, so I know that area quite well. Okay.
Okay.
And there's actually a lot of natural, when you think of Allen Gardens and you think of all the cemeteries, I mean, there's a lot of, and the river valley, there's a lot of natural habitats there, definitely.
Right. So we are definitely putting in a pollinator garden at Our Lady of Lourdes. We will be working with St. Luke's. The Reverend there suggested actually a Bible camp on the care of creation.
Right.
So we're going to see if we can get that going this summer. I'm been in contact with the director of Allen Gardens. So I'm hoping we put in a pollinator garden there. And then our Martin Luther Church in Etobicoke would like a pollinator garden. And then from all of these locations, we're hoping to network out to create these webs of peace.
Very good idea. So you mentioned, I think, that natural bees don't have hives. So what is their, but they have colonies, I'm assuming.
Bumblebees do. They have colonies. Yeah. Bumblebees. I read that they have colonies up to 100 members. Maybe it's even a little bit more than that. But compared to honeybees, which have colonies of up to 80,000 members,
Wow.
then the bumblebee colony is tiny in comparison.
Right.
Bumblebees also do produce honey, but not the honey that we harvest. They produce little honey pots for their own babies, and we can't harvest that honey. So those would probably be the bees most similar to honeybees, but otherwise, most bees, 90% of the world's bees are largely solitary. And so they live
Really?
alone.
Okay.
The females dig their own tunnel to lay their eggs. Sometimes they may share an entrance with their sisters, maybe up to like 10 bees or something, and they each have their own tunnel. It's like a condo setting, right? Yeah, but otherwise, they may be completely solitary.
Well, that's interesting because in our pre-conversation, you talked about bees evolving from wasps. And of
Yeah.
course, then I think naturally of wasps in their nests. So there's naturally sort of a colony, so to speak. So then, so then bees developed from wasps, but then who were already nesting, but then the natural bees just moved away from nesting. That's interesting as a development. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Well, and wasps are largely carnivorous,
Yes.
whereas bees are largely vegetarian.
Right.
But there's also a family of bees known as cuckoo bees, kleptoparasitic bees, that actually break into the nests of other bees. And the thief will actually like eat the larvae of whatever nest she's broken into, and then lay her own eggs. Right. So they don't seem to collect pollen or, do all sorts of things because they're thieves. They're like the cuckoo bird. Right. And I thought this was interesting because if they're eating the larvae of other bees, that also makes them carnivorous.
Okay. Right.
But most bees are out drinking nectar.
So you may remember a few decades ago, we were all terrified by the idea of the killer bees coming up from South and Central America. And as a child, we were all terrified, thinking they're going to arrive and attack. Of course, that gave rise to all these sci-fi bee movies. But of course, I don't recall them ever arriving. And so, was that a urban myth, or was that a real fact, or are you aware of any of that? Or
I think what I've heard more recently about is the killer hornets that have entered into the United States, and they are a problem. Right. They are killing bees on farms. Right. So it's not, what's actually a myth and what actually are they killing? I mean, I think a lot of this has been incredibly exaggerated. I have heard about a bee strain that has been partly bred from the African honeybee. And the African honeybee, so what we have here in Canada is the Western honeybee, which is more from Europe, as opposed to the African honeybee and the Asian honeybee, which are both much more aggressive. I know the Asian honeybee is definitely much bigger too. And so there's an African strain that I think was interbred with the Western honeybee, if I remember correctly, and that is then more aggressive. But I think, there's so much fear about getting stung, and a lot of that fear actually comes from the wasps, because the wasps are the ones that, if you're eating a tuna sandwich, the wasp is going to come right up and go, hey, that smells really good. Can I have a bite? Right? And you think, oh my God, this wasp is attacking me. The wasp is not attacking you, actually. It just wants to eat, right? Or it gets into your soda pop or something. Bees and wasps, they attack if they feel like they've been attacked. And the fact is that the whole thing about being allergic, the fear highly outweighs the statistics. About 1% of children have an allergy to insect stings, and about 3% of adults. You have much more to fear every time you get in your car than you have to fear from a bee.
That's very helpful. Well, thank you. And Susan, do you have a question?
I suppose the question is also I'm sure it's online, but a list of bee-friendly plants, not just the native ones, but if there are other things we should be looking to plant.
That I think the best way to go about this is to just put into internet a native plant nursery. And then you can see all the different native plants. I mean, we have some of these listed on the Bees for Peace website. One of my favorites is what's called prairie smoke. It has this, the flower is kind of like this red, it's like this red hair almost that kind of wafts up. I really think that's beautiful. As I mentioned, goldenrod is always good to plant. A redbud tree. There's wild strawberries, you know, so you can do a combination of what's good for the bees, but what's also something that you can eat. But these are two resources. I would say look at the Bees for Peace website for a few suggestions, but really look at the native plant nurseries.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's very helpful. Carrie, you've been remarkable, and I want to thank you for helping us be even more curious about native bees, not tiny bees, and about learning more about the habitats. I think that education needs to happen very much. So
Yeah.
I think that's key. That's key.
Yeah.
I'm just going to bring back Susan to say thank you.
Thank you very much. That was amazing.
Thank you, Susan.
And thank you everyone for coming. I hope you can join us next week. We will have Joanne Stevenson, who will be talking about the upcoming solstice and how that affects planting, which ties nicely in with this week's talk. So I hope you can all join us for that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.